baby and I didn't say anything.
Okay, hold on a second. When you say you had the baby, where were you?
I was in my bathroom.
She's got to keep this secret. She's got to keep it hidden from her mom, her dad, all of her friends.
How could that happen? I've seen her every day. I look at her, I talk to her.
I'm really, really sorry.
High school can be a pretty scary time. For the first time in your life, you're treated like an adult. You have a lot of responsibilities, you have to get good grades and choose your career, and on top of it all, you have to socialize. Perhaps you're the shy type who doesn't feel comfortable surrounded by 100 new people. Or perhaps you have a few bad memories from your past and don't find it that easy to trust all of your new schoolmates. Imagine throwing a teenage pregnancy on top of that. How do you handle it? Would your parents be okay with it? Do they even have to know? When is the right time to tell them? And what would they say if you kept the baby? What would they say if you didn't? These are just some of the questions that flooded Brooke Skylar Richardson's mind when this happened to her. She was not prepared for this. Then, the world was not prepared for what she was about to do. It left everyone shocked. Her parents, her friends, and her schoolmates, none of which had any idea of what she was going through. Trigger warning, some of the details discussed in this case might be disturbing, to say the least. But if you're ready, let's dive in. Our story takes place in a sweet little town called Carlisle, Ohio. It's home to 5,000 people, just about retaining its status as a city and not a village. This also means that it's normally a friendly place, where people know each other and the communities around the schools and churches are tightly knit. And the Richardson family fit right into this scenario. Brooke Skylar Richardson was just like any other American high school girl. She had a lot of friends, was sporty, energetic, and a cheerleader. In fact, she was present at pretty much all sports events in Carlisle.
Skylar Richardson, by all accounts, was a good student. She was well liked at Carlisle High School. She was a cheerleader.
But you know how sometimes it's dangerous to paint the picture of a perfect life just from a few facts and social media photos? Life is never that peachy, no matter how bright their smile is or how beautiful the beach in the background looks. This was the case with Skylar too.
She had some issues. She had been abused by a boy that she was interested in when she was in junior high, and she had been diagnosed by a psychologist with dependent personality disorder, meaning she craves approval and attention from authority figures.
That's quite problematic. Think about it. If you're desperate for the approval of others, you'll do anything to get into their good graces. Plus, you might start hanging around nasty people who abuse the situation. Instead of running away from boys like the one that had abused her, Skylar ended up surrounding herself with unpleasant individuals again. Needless to say, this affected her mental health too.
She may seem fine on the outside, but on the inside, she's often crumbling because of her emotional state.
The problem was Skylar didn't want to talk about her issues with anyone. Not her mom, not her best friends. Well, wait, we'll go back to her mom. Skylar had developed an eating disorder. She was getting skinnier and skinnier and refused to eat a healthy amount. But instead of seeing this and showing concern, her mom Kim seemed to encourage this behavior.
It almost seemed like Kim Richardson was living vicariously through her daughter. Kim Richardson was telling her daughter, she was kind of jealous of her being at the gym and being able to work out, and she was also cheering her on to lose weight despite having an eating disorder.
It's at least strange that a mom living with her daughter would see her lose weight every month and encourage her to carry on. Was this because of the impossible body standards set out by Hollywood and the fashion industry? Or was there a darker reason behind this? Still, nothing compared to what Skylar was about to go through. It was April 2017, and Kim had arranged for Skylar to visit her OBGYN. This was a simple visit designed to get Skylar a contraceptive prescription. But that day, Skylar would learn something that would change her life forever. She was 8 months pregnant. How could this be? How did her belly not grow? An 8-month-old baby should be big enough to give you a bump, right?
How could that happen? I've seen her every day. I look at her, I talk to her.
I hug her.
This was Skylar 7 months pregnant at the beach, photographed by her parents. Kim just thought she was finally healthy. She'd been struggling with her eating disorders for years, and her mom was happy to see she had put on some weight. She didn't want to bring up the subject as she didn't want to upset Skylar. Now, at the doctor's office, Skylar was panicking.
She said that she was not prepared to deliver a baby. She could not have a baby.
Imagine being 18, just about to graduate from high school, preparing for your prom, and then college. On top of that, you've got an eating disorder and are obsessed with your body image, including not having a belly. There was another layer of anxiety to her story. The baby's father, Trey Johnson, was another high school boy Skylar had dated for a couple months the summer before. This was not a scenario where they could reconcile and be happy parents together. She didn't even want to tell him. He hadn't been nice to her, and she didn't even want to stay friends with him after their fling. So that day, Skylar made a decision, possibly the worst decision in her life. She would not tell a soul about the pregnancy. If she managed to hide it for 8 months, perhaps even from herself, then she could hide it for another month. Then who knows, maybe she would be able to hide the baby somehow as well. I know, it doesn't sound realistic, does it? But by now, Skylar wasn't thinking straight. She was afraid of people's reactions to her pregnancy, and she was afraid of ruining her future. After all, she'd heard her mom before talking about teenage pregnancies.
Her mother believed if she ever had a child at this point in her life that it would ruin her life. She wouldn't be able to go to college. She wouldn't get a job. She would have to leave all of that behind and be a full-time mother.
Skylar was 9 months pregnant when she put on this red dress and went to the prom. Somehow she made it through the night without telling anyone, and without anyone asking her about her tiny bump. She kept a tight smile and danced like nothing was happening.
She's fully aware that she's pregnant. She knows that this life is growing within her, but yet she's got to keep this secret. She's got to keep it hidden from her mom, her dad, all of her friends.
Skylar had no idea what to do next, and she didn't want to ask for any help or advice. That night she would go into labor, and now it's about to take a dark turn. Trust me. It was July 2017, and Skylar, skinny like before, paid her OBGYN a visit again. Without mentioning the pregnancy or the baby, she bluntly asked for a contraceptive prescription. Of course, the doctor had to ask, "Where's the baby?"
I had the baby and I didn't.
Okay, hold on a second. When you say you had the baby, where were you?
I was in my bathroom. It just came out when I pushed and it wasn't breathing. It didn't make any noises.
Yep, Skylar's story inside the doctor's office was so strange that it earned her a straight arrest. Apparently, on the night of her prom, Skylar started getting very painful cramps. She lived with these cramps for 2 whole days, hoping they would go away and not even considering going to a hospital. Of course, she was in labor. Somehow her parents didn't notice this. 2 days after the prom, she went upstairs to the bathroom, sat in the tub, and gave birth to her baby daughter by herself. She named her daughter Annabelle, but to her shock, Annabelle wasn't breathing.
I put her in my arms, I tried to hold her, and she's breathing. She doesn't have a heartbeat. She's not breathing.
How did you, I know the breathing part you can kind of tell and see. Did you ever hear a cry or a whimper? When you say she didn't have a heartbeat, did you try to check it?
I tried to feel, I
tried to feel in her
hard.
chest.
I didn't mean to push hard, I just felt.
Annabelle's eyes were closed and she wasn't making any noises. It appeared like she had been stillborn. Now Skylar could take her secret to the grave, or so she thought. This was where it got even creepier. Skylar took Annabelle's body and buried her in the backyard.
What do you do when you realize that she's not going to make it?
I have to bury her.
Skylar could have called 911, or at least her mom, her dad, or her brother. Anyone could have told her that burying your newborn baby in your garden looked like murder. Not to say maybe Annabelle could have been saved if she had called the emergency services.
This was not well thought out. This was a kind of a hurried, frenzied event where the remains were disposed of in a very shallow location, to mention a deceased person that she's just given birth to. So that makes this all the more ominous.
Now the police still had to answer the question. Was she telling the truth about Annabelle being stillborn, or did she her baby, desperate to keep her pregnancy a secret?
there's that image of her at prom, and she is pregnant there. And I swear, every time I look at that image, it haunts me because I'm thinking there is a baby there that you cannot fully appreciate. No one could fully appreciate because she was masking it so well. Could she have bound herself so tightly that it compromised the baby's ability to grow appropriately?
Certainly, if you starve yourself and wrap tight clothing around your belly for 9 months, that baby's not going to be fine. But the prosecutors wanted to paint an even grimmer picture around Skylar.
I think that she was not being honest. She was either hiding something or outright lying. I always felt that there wasn't something right that she was bringing forth. And I thought that that was extremely obvious, whereas other experts thought the opposite.
For example, you can see how comforting the police detectives were with her during the interrogation.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
That's okay. I know this is...
Oh, we're gonna kill her. I never meant to hurt her.
I understand that. Skylar, again, like I've told you, we don't think you meant to hurt her. We don't think you hurt her.
Now, anyone listening to this story can say, poor Skylar, she went through a lot. This all sounds very intense, and it just seems like she was so desperate to keep it all a secret that she lost her mind for a minute, or for 9 months. But what baffled the detectives most was Skylar's behavior right after giving birth and burying her baby.
Skylar's behavior after the birth of this child seems to be anything but normal. She starts going to the gym and working out, running on the treadmill, taking pictures of her stomach and sending text messages to her mom, showing her how she was losing weight and even talking about how she was going to get rid of that belly.
How was her mom still encouraging this behavior by now? Did she really have no idea why Skylar had a belly before? Was she really this obsessed with her daughter being skinny that she never asked her about it? Then the detectives uncovered Skylar's internet searches prior to the birth. They were creepy, to say the least.
Well, but see, how to get rid of a baby is kind of,
Sounds really bad now. I'm
that's
sorry.
like how...
Nothing was going to, I didn't try anything.
Maybe she didn't, but all her internet searches pointed to a different, more McRae scenario.
Everything suggested that she did not intend to ever have that baby. And there was affirmative things that she did to hide her pregnancy. I mean, remember, she went to the prom just right before she wound up giving birth in her home. She never asked for any help, of course, from her family while she was giving birth. She did it all silently while they were right there.
Basically, if her baby had been born alive, the prosecutor believes Skylar would have found a way to end her life anyway. And Skylar's odd behavior doesn't stop there. In fact, the creepiest detail hasn't been revealed yet. During Annabelle's autopsy, the doctors found something truly strange. There were fractures to the baby's skull and spine, but it was impossible to determine whether Skylar had broken her spine before or after her death.
When we just think about the fragility, if you will, of a newborn and how susceptible they are to any kind of environmental changes, particularly after death, it makes it very hard to read from a forensic standpoint. At the end of the day, we don't have any soft tissue.
All police had was Skylar's confession. According to her, she simply mishandled the body of her stillborn child before burying her. During the interrogation, the police welcomed Skylar's parents into the room.
You should have just told us.
I know.
The detectives left the room as they let Skylar chat with her parents. But of course the cameras were still on, as they were fishing for a more complete confession.
I think they want to know if I killed it myself.
Yeah, you'll go to jail.
I didn't though.
Did you hear her mother's reaction? Kim was ready to shame her daughter and promise her prison time before she even heard the reality of her story. It was only her father, Scott, that was comforting her in the interrogation room.
I know you're sorry. I'm so lying. Because
But I was completely honest to them.
you lied to us.
He maintained his calm during the whole ordeal.
Skylar's relationship with her father, she was a daddy's little girl. He loved her very much.
Kim, on the other hand, was more concerned about their public image.
No, you go to jail. It's in the papers. It's everywhere. The neighbors have already called me. Chris already called me, and I know she was telling me that they're digging up stuff in her backyard. You're going to be on the news. How do you think Mims and Paps and Bill and Gina also?
Kim went on to shame Skylar for earning herself a prison sentence, but that wasn't even the case yet. She just assumed her daughter did the worst and told her off for doing this to herself. Skylar was going to go home with her parents that night, but she would be brought back in for questioning 6 days later. The coroner had discovered charred bones.
Tell me about the fire.
What fire?
The police detective made it clear that they knew she had tried to her baby. Skylar's first reaction was complete denial.
I didn't burn her. I promise on anything I didn't burn her. I didn't burn her.
Are you sure?
I swear on anything. That I'm sure of.
So first, she swore and promised she didn't burn Annabelle. But just a few questions later, she started changing her story. And the more questions the detectives asked her, the more she seemed to change the whole story. Now it seemed like Annabelle hadn't been stillborn. Not really.
That somehow you know she was alive like before that, and that's why you're worried you didn't do something that could have helped.
Why did she make any noise?
Maybe noise. What kind of noise?
Maybe a little noise. It grew, but I didn't know if it was something else. I saw her arms maybe a little, but moving on. I didn't think she was breathing. I think I squeezed her too hard.
As she confessed, she broke down, realizing the brutal reality of what she had done.
It's okay. You can't. It's okay. You were trying.
I think that was killed her.
Okay. Okay.
I think I killed her. I think I killed her on purpose.
No one said it, Skylar. No one believes that.
Finally, the police had a cause of death for little Annabelle: asphyxia by compression.
Direct pressure is being applied where she might clutch this child very, very tight to her chest, and the child's chest can't even begin to rise and fall.
Now Skylar could not go back home to her parents. She would have to go to jail, at least until she would be released on bail. She was charged with aggravated child endangerment and gross abuse of a Skylar's trial began on September 3rd, 2019. In the 2 years leading up to it, the Richardsons went through thick and thin.
Is there a way to describe this past year?
The worst nightmare. Our lives have been completely turned upside down.
Skylar's classmates would line up in front of her house to take pictures and throw things at the house. They would bully her online, while other people would even send death threats to the whole family. She was labeled as a baby killer and deemed a lost cause. Other people supported Skylar, empathizing with a confused teenager who was too afraid of her parents' reactions to tell them about the pregnancy. At the trial, it became clear that the prosecution didn't have a strong case against Skylar.
If the child was born stillborn, there can't be murder. In the aggregate, there were a lot of errors that I think took down the quality of the case.
The main mistake was that the prosecution relied a lot on Skylar burning, but it turns out that most of the black marks on the bones are very typical of infants' bones. They were not charred. The prosecution couldn't prove that Skylar had cremated Annabelle to the bone. If she had just touched the baby with the fire, it would have only reached the skin. So the cause of death was ruled homicidal violence, but no one could confirm any details beyond the main cause. Sure, but didn't the detectives conclude asphyxia by applying pressure before? True, but there was another issue during Skylar's case. She did say she might have squeezed Annabelle too hard, but this was hours after the detectives had been putting pressure on her. Skylar's defense team argued that she gave a false confession after the police put pressure on her. On top of that, Skylar's dad, Scott, also complained that the police never informed them they would record their meeting inside the interrogation room. Not only were they not told this, but detectives also advised Scott that Skylar didn't need a lawyer. He thus felt that the police tried to make Skylar look guilty at all costs. Still, the prosecution argued otherwise.
I thought that they conducted a fair interview, and she said so much that could let a jury determine that she wasn't being credible. I didn't see that there was any level of intense pressure or unlawful, unconstitutional pressure that the police were using during her interviews.
Indeed, if you look at the first interview, the detectives are nice and comforting to Skylar.
Skylar's first interview with police, she's understandably very scared. I thought the one detective, Lieutenant John Fain, I thought he was really nice to her. He was trying to provide some measure of comfort to a young girl who's gone through something terrible.
But during the second one, where she gives the alleged full confession, the female detective's behavior is a little odd.
The female detective kept reaching over and trying to hold her hand and, trying to lead her down this path to get her to admit that the baby was alive.
Think about how proud Annabelle would be to have you as a mom for being honest about what happened.
She talks about honesty, but her whole loving mother act might just be a guise to make Skylar feel comfortable and say more than she actually did. And remember how Skylar was diagnosed with dependent personality disorder, meaning she craved authorities' approval? Well, the defense played this card in court too. The mental issue made Skylar much more likely to say whatever the detectives wanted to hear. But throughout the whole trial, people's feelings were extremely divided. For Skylar, the only worst experience was probably the birth itself. From Skylar's point of view, she was not a baby. She was a scared teenager who didn't know when to ask for help and would end up doing something horrible. After 4 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a similar conclusion.
With regard to count 1, we, the jury in the above captioned case, find the defendant, Brooke Skylar Richardson, not guilty of the offense of aggravated.
Skylar was convicted of gross of a though.
I was not surprised by the verdict at all. It was going to be very difficult to get an aggravated murder conviction when the medical experts all testified that they could not determine the cause of death because the body was too decomposed.
The judge told Skylar he sees this case as the story of 2 little girls, her and Annabelle, thus pointing out just how unprepared she was to be a mom.
Did Miss Richardson have overbearing parents? Yes. Did she suffer from an eating disorder? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that you're allowed to your baby or bury your baby in your backyard.
Of course, Skylar had to be punished for burying her baby and not attempting to save her life. She was sentenced to 3 years probation.
Thank you, Your Honor. I would do anything and above that you ask, and I understand. And I just wanted to say how sorry I was. I can sometimes be selfish, but I would like to think that I've become better in the knowledge that I've upset everyone and hurt so many people with what I've done, and I'm forever sorry, and I'm so sorry.
The prosecution thought it was unfair how much the judge empathized with Skylar's story, and that perhaps her sentence was too light. A year into her probation in 2020, Skylar was going to college and had a part-time job at the lawyer firm that defended her. This was the only place that would hire her.
I do show remorse, and I am very sorry, and I hurt a lot, but I have been not showing it as much.
Analyzing Skylar's situation, the judge decided to acquit her early.
This is a low-level felony. You have no prior criminal history. You are employed. You are going to college. And there is no reason for me to invest the time and resources of my probation department in supervising you.
Skylar is now free and working hard to repair her image, but some people still see her as a killing psycho who should be in prison. However, others see more layers to the story. Teenage pregnancies are tough, and if you feel like you can't talk to your parents about it, it's extra tough. Skylar's case should work as a lesson to all families and to the system that can protect teenage moms who want to deliver their babies. There are adoption centers, hospitals, and police stations where moms can leave their newborn babies anonymously and safely with no consequence. It's not ideal, but it's better than burying them in your backyard.
Just a few days ago, Miranda Barber confessed to being a serial killer who stopped counting her victims when she got to number 22.
I could potentially be sitting in front of the world's worst female serial killer of all time.
I always told everybody I thought Miranda was possessed.
Hi there. Glad to see you back here. Some serial killers try to hide every step of their horrific acts until the very last minute. Others get so cocky that they leave clues for the police detectives, taunting them as they believe they'll never get caught. But with some serial killers, the situation is even more confusing. When Miranda Barber was arrested for the murder of Troy LaFera, she confessed to killing at least 22 other people.
Are you saying that you have killed before? How many times, Miranda?
I know that when I hit 22, I stopped counting.
When you hit 22, you stop counting.
For years, detectives had been trying to figure out whether she was telling the truth or simply bluffing, wanting to project a more menacing persona to the media. This satanic teenager had more than one or two disturbing events in her past. Let's dive into this case and discover the truth behind Miranda Barber. Miranda Barber was born on December 14th, 1994, in North Pole, Alaska. No, this isn't actually the North Pole, but it's pretty much just as cold, with snow and a gray sky being the norm. The whole city is decorated for Christmas year-round, but this didn't make life any jollier for little Miranda. She grew up with her mom, Elizabeth, her dad, and her older sister, Ashley. When she was 2 years old, she was diagnosed with developmental dysplasia. This meant that her hip joint did not form well and she had to wear leg braces for a few years. These are the years that she was supposed to be running and playing with other kids, but she couldn't. Around this time, Miranda's uncle, Richard, moved into the same neighborhood. He was the husband of Elizabeth's sister, and he had a daughter the same age as Miranda. As a result of this, Miranda and Ashley would often spend days on end at their home. This is where it gets dark.
We discovered sexual abuse in her family. Her uncle Rick, her when Miranda was just 3 years old.
Richard was one of the most horrific as you can imagine. Every time he was home alone with the girls, he would subject them to some truly terrifying forms of abuse, with details so gruesome we actually can't discuss here. As you might imagine, he had scared the girls into not telling anyone about this. But after months of suffering, Ashley, who was 6, told her mom. Elizabeth immediately went to the police, and the officers rushed to Richard's house with a search warrant. Inside, they found a handwritten manual titled, "Fun with My Sister's Kids." He had detailed accounts of every horrific act he had committed against the girls and encouraged all fathers out there to do the same to their daughters, nieces, and granddaughters. He was arrested and sentenced to 19 years in prison. He was freed after only 10, but as he was caught on disturbed and illegal child websites, he was once again sent to prison, this time to 40 years. This monster may have been sent away, but for Miranda, the trauma was far from over.
She has this horrendous intergenerational demon, the demon of abuse.
The biggest things you hear from a lot of victims is, "I wasn't there. I can't tell you anything because I wasn't there." And that's one of the things that the mind can do. It's that ability to disassociate or to become somebody else. And so they put on this other persona, this other personality.
Tragically, Miranda's story mirrored that of her mother's. She had been violated by her own father when she was just a child. And perhaps unsurprisingly, Richard himself had been a victim of someone in his family when he was growing up. Elizabeth was devastated to learn that both her daughters had gone through something as horrific as this, and that she had trusted Richard all this time. She was often shielding Miranda and Ashley from spending time with their friends' families, afraid of such events, when the real monster was someone in her family. Shattered and desperate to move on, Elizabeth took her daughters and moved to Palmer, also in Alaska. Life there was good for Elizabeth and her daughters, but Miranda never forgot what she had gone through. This is what she wrote in her diary as a young teen. "I feel dirty, violated, hurt, and ashamed. How could he think that he had the right to hurt me and my sister the way he did? I wanted him to hurt worse than he hurt me." Many teenagers go through crazy phases when they try out dangerous things or they run away from home. But Miranda started exhibiting this worrying behavior when she was just 13 years old.
Miranda wouldn't come home for 2-3 days, week at a time.
Ashley also remembers Miranda joining dubious gangs at a very young age. Miranda had met a 25-year-old man called Forrest. He was the leader of a satanic cult. Apparently, one day she returned home from one of her runaway trips and told her mom that Forrest owned her now. It's unclear whether Miranda was telling the truth and whether Elizabeth tried to investigate the situation at all. Miranda kept leaving home, and she would get into trouble at school more and more often. Now, substance abuse had become a part of her life too. tragically, a very big part of her life.
You know there's a problem when you're out front of a house and you know your daughter's in there doing and you turn to your 16-year-old daughter and argue with her about who's going in there to get her.
By the time Miranda was 14, she was also taking several prescription meds, including Prozac for depression and Adderall for ADHD. She had also been diagnosed with schizophrenia and bipolar disease and was taking medication for those too. As you can probably imagine by now, Miranda wasn't well. She even tried taking her own life several times. But although her mom had sent her to mental health specialists, she seemed to have forgotten about her now. Elizabeth and Miranda's dad went through a nasty divorce right around the time Miranda was a teenager. And according to Ashley, she would spend an awful amount of time distracted by TV, social media, and other men, all while ignoring her daughters.
She said you allowed her to be alone all day taking online classes, knowing that Miranda was on and being promiscuous. She says you told Ashley, don't call me again, when Ashley called crying because Miranda came at her with a knife.
Elizabeth was in completely over her head and simply didn't know how to handle Miranda's behavior anymore. So she decided to cut her out. This did not have a positive impact on Miranda. Lacking the attention and support from her family, Miranda turned to her gang friends for help. They set a horrific model for her. Illegal substances, vandalizing property, and sleeping for money became Miranda's daily activities. At one point, Miranda got pregnant with a customer and Forrest ordered her to get an abortion. But this wasn't a clean abortion done in a clinic, it was a backstreet procedure that left Miranda traumatized. So when she got pregnant again at the age of 17, she decided to keep her baby. Meanwhile, Miranda was still living with her mom, and she was becoming even more desperate to get her attention back. In a fairly big act, Miranda wrote to Dr. Phil, "Dear Dr. Phil, ever since my parents got divorced, my mom has become a pill-popping drunk. She meets random men off the internet and has them come over. She also claims to have stage 3 cancer but won't stop drinking or taking all the pills. She doesn't care to live anymore. She tells my sister and me that every day. I just want my mom. I'm at a loss of how to help her." Dr. Phil didn't respond to Miranda's letter, but the letter did attract the attention of the authorities. Since Miranda was still a minor and Elizabeth was deemed unfit to care for her daughter, Miranda was sent to North Carolina to live with her extended family. That's where Miranda met Elliot Barber. In 2011, a 17-year-old pregnant Miranda arrived in North Carolina. Before long, she met 20-year-old Elliot. At the time, he was together with a woman called Amy, and she was pregnant too, just like Miranda. The women gave birth to girls just 2 months apart, and they ended up spending a lot of time together, as young moms who are happy to help each other out with their newborn daughters. Miranda became part of a strange triangle. She and Elliot had something else in common: their schizophrenia. Unfortunately, Elliot was also addicted to illegal substances, particularly pills. According to him, they made the voices in his head go away. But one day he overdosed and never fully recovered afterward. He began to drink and abuse substances more than ever. As a result of this, he also became more violent. After months of enduring this, Amy decided to call it quits with Elliot. She took her baby daughter and left the city. Mere days had passed, and Elliot was already together with Miranda. Their love for the satanic only evolved while they were together. They read about the occult, and they even practiced what they thought was a satanic intercourse. This meant that they would harm each other and then have intercourse while bleeding. When Miranda was 18, the couple decided to get married and run away from North Carolina, together with Miranda's daughter Aria. Next stop, Pennsylvania. In 2013, Miranda and Elliot arrived in Pennsylvania, a young couple with their whole lives ahead of them. But they were desperate for money, and they had a baby to feed too. So Miranda put an ad on Craigslist, female companionship in exchange for money. This was not the first time Miranda had done this. Remember, she started this while she was in Forrest's gang, and this is now how she got pregnant in the first place. Except this time, things would turn very ugly. One man who replied to Miranda's ad was 42-year-old Troy LaFerrara. At the time, Troy was an engineer living with his wife of 2 years, Colleen. But things were not as peachy as they might have seemed for the couple. Troy had been cheating on his wife for the whole duration of their relationship, seeking adultery in the form of services by women on the internet. So on November 11th, 2013, Troy was set to meet Miranda. But Miranda and Elliot had plans very different from what Troy was hoping for.
So you just decided you're gonna kill
We just decided that we were gonna kill somebody. We had no reason to know anything else other than that.
Miranda met Troy in a shopping mall parking lot. Troy got into her car and the two drove off to a more private place. What Troy didn't know was that Elliot was hiding under a blanket under the back seat of the car. When the car stopped, Miranda said the code sentence, "Have you seen the stars tonight?" That's when Elliot jumped out of the blanket and grabbed Troy from behind his seat, strangling him with a TV cable. Meanwhile, Miranda stabbed him.
I stabbed him once and it didn't do anything.
She stabbed him in the groin, she stabbed him in the neck, and it went through. Then went out to eat it right off. It was delicious.
While it wasn't as straightforward as Elliot tries to make it sound, the first time Miranda gave the stars signal, Elliot didn't react. It was only the second time, after punching him through the blanket, that he emerged. Then, as the two were attacking Troy, he put up a serious fight with both of them. In between, he even managed to open the car door and put his leg out. The lights inside the car opened, and Miranda started panicking that people down the road could see them. She shouted at Elliot, who jumped out of the car and pushed Troy back inside. Miranda attacked Troy with a knife 20 times. This was too much for him to fight, and tragically, he lost his life that night. Miranda and Elliot drove Troy's body and dumped it in a narrow alleyway in the area, but not before stealing the $150 in his wallet. Then they went to Walmart and got cleaning supplies to erase all the evidence from their car. Then, just like Elliot said, they went and had dinner. A nice dinner, with all the $150 they'd just stolen from the man they killed. Oh yeah, it was also Elliot's birthday. As a present, Miranda committed the murder, then took him out to a restaurant and to a strip club. Sheesh. The next morning, Troy's body was discovered in the alleyway. The first thing police noticed was just how viciously he'd been attacked.
So I got up there and I was like, what's going on? He said, whoever wanted this man dead wanted him really, really dead.
The next logical step was for the police to look through Troy's phone, much to his wife's jargon.
We found companionship sites from the day he was killed.
The police officers brought Miranda in for questioning. The facts were pretty out there. They knew she was supposed to meet Troy that night, and hers was the last phone number Troy had called. But Miranda had prepared a story for this case.
So you were going to meet up with this guy, make a couple of bucks?
Yes.
Okay. Were you on the phone with him at all, or talking to him, or messaging him?
We were messaging back and forth, yes.
Okay.
We were just supposed to meet up at Denny's, but it never happened.
Meeting never happened?
Yes.
However, the police detective reminded Miranda that they knew Troy's last phone call was to her on the night of his death.
So I'm going to ask you right now a very basic, very simple question.
Okay.
That you need to answer either yes or no to.
Okay.
Were you involved in, or do you have any knowledge of the death of that guy, the death of Troy?
No.
Then, as the police continued to question her, Miranda started acting more aggressively towards them, demanding that they let her get back to her daughter. And when the officer told her that they needed to seize her phone as evidence, things escalated.
Actually, Miranda, we got to take your phone, put it in evidence, and then get a search warrant to go through.
That's not fair to me at all.
That's what we have to do.
I have the right to walk out of here with all of my belongings, which I'm going to do.
Not with your phone. We're going to take your phone.
I'm very offended right now.
I'm sorry.
I
you understand?
I have time. I need numbers. I need my phone numbers.
Do you understand we have a job to do?
I did not kill that man. I've never met that man in my life before.
I hope not.
I'm a single. I just got married. You guys are coming in my life, questioning me. I'm very offended.
Of course, we all know that she was lying through her teeth. Her being very offended was just an act meant to intimidate the police, but it only made them more suspicious of her.
Do you understand why we're questioning you?
Do you understand why I feel the way that I feel?
No. Do you understand why we're questioning you?
I don't.
So
I never met up with
so
him.
your phone number being the last...
Yes, but I never met up with this man.
Understandable, but do you think that maybe is something we need to check into?
I want to go into my baby who is screaming her head off for me.
Miranda literally left, kicking and screaming as the police struggled to seize her phone. That same night, the police brought Elliot in for questioning. He'd been married to Miranda for 40 days at the time of his arrest. The first question the detective had for Elliot, apart from how to pronounce his name, was what he knew about Miranda being the last person Troy called.
What do you know? Alright, I guess full honesty here, I've never heard of him, and I don't know anything about that, but the only thing I know is that what my wife does is meet with someone who's willing to like just pay you some money to have a nice conversation and sit down. Doesn't provide anything other than companionship, because that's what they want.
The detective questioned Elliot further about what exactly Miranda's Craigslist ad entailed.
I don't know if you've ever seen the type of movies to where like someone goes to I'm saying she's poor, but that's a comparison. A guy goes to he's totally about to have with her, then he like breaks down, and then the whole scene is him crying, oh, I hate my life, I love my wife so much, but she's just being a bitch. And then she's just like filing her nails, listening to him, and then she gets paid for the companionship.
The detective then told Elliot that Miranda had actually met Troy on Elliot's birthday. Elliot even seemed a bit upset, and he said he would have a chat when he got home that night. He was much more believable than Miranda. Both he and Miranda were dismissed that evening, and the detectives were racking their heads to find a way to prove Miranda's guilt and get a warrant for her arrest. Meanwhile, Miranda and Elliot were back home with their friend Shay. They'd been living at her place since their arrival from North Carolina. They were having a chat when Miranda told Shay all of a sudden that she'd just stabbed a man. After a few seconds of shock and disbelief, Shay realized she was telling the truth. She urged Miranda to hand herself in. Incredibly enough, she did. She said farewell to Shay, her baby daughter, and Elliot, who was crying, all too aware that this was the end of Miranda's freedom. At 4 a.m., 7 hours after the police dismissed her, Miranda showed up at the police station doorstep, admitting to the crime. But she had concocted another story.
I arranged to meet up with him, and I pulled in the mall. I saw him. He got in my car. Everything seemed fine, and as soon as I put the car in park, everything just completely flipped upside down. I didn't know what to do. He just attacked me.
What was he doing to you?
One hand was on my throat, with the other hand was touching me down there.
This all sounds horrific, except it's all a big lie. Troy never forced himself onto Miranda. She was trying to paint the picture of self-defense.
I do have 3 knives in my car. I usually carry one on me, and I just grabbed it.
What happened after you took the knife?
I stabbed him once, and it didn't do anything. And I stabbed him again, and it didn't do anything. It was still being continued. There was nothing that changed.
If Miranda's confession was the only piece of evidence the police had, her lie might have worked. But as they were interrogating her, the police also got their hands on CCTV footage, clearly showing her, Elliot, and Troy inside the car. So the detectives went over to Elliot's house, asking a few more questions. When Elliot opened the door, the detective told him they now had CCTV, showing that he was at the meeting too. Elliot was just smoking a cigarette. Hearing the detective's words, he said something along the lines of, "Okay, so this is my last cigarette as a free man." The detective certainly wasn't expecting this. Just like Miranda, Elliot seemed relieved to be able to confess. The police didn't even suspect Elliot of murder or even being an accomplice, because at the time, they believed Miranda's self-defense story. Elliot was immediately brought over to the police station. This time, he confessed to everything. Their plan to kill someone on his birthday, the method, and the reality behind Miranda's Craigslist ad.
He was looking for. She misleadingly sold him through texts. but that was never the intention. The whole intention was to go.
The confession was as straightforward as a confession could be. The police had all the information on a plate.
I'm in the back seat, covered up by a blanket. He gets in the car, probably around 8. So I pop up with that. What did y'all found on the body? That was me.
Where do you have that cable at? Just right around his body? Around his throat? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, good. It was pretty good.
The same.
In between the headpiece and the bottom was where I tried to angle it up underneath it, and I put my feet up against the back and pulled as hard as I could.
Elliot seemed pretty proud of his deed. Throughout the confession, his tone is jolly, and he's eager to share details that the police didn't even request, like the great burgers he and Miranda had after murdering Troy.
Then we went out to eat at Red Robin. It was delicious. It was delicious. It was delicious to eat. I ate a burger. It was fantastic.
Get the unlimited fries? Get the unlimited fries?
That's it. It was amazing. Every bit of it was amazing.
Elliot's confession was baffling to the detective. Not only did he seem remorseless, but he truly enjoyed describing the evening of his birthday and the horrific murder. Not once did he appear to grasp the gravity of the situation. Elliot and Miranda were arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of Troy LaFerrara. The police ruled the motive to be financial gain, simply because the two had stolen $150 from the victim. However, the real motive seems to be truly random. One day, Miranda and Elliot decided they both wanted to kill someone, so they started planning it. And it's about to get even more confusing. Although Elliot had just confessed to everything, both he and Miranda pleaded not guilty at their pretrial. By now, they were making headlines nationwide. What made the case even more newsworthy was Miranda's appearance. She was a 19-year-old girl with a pretty face that no one would expect to hurt a fly. You might be forgiven for thinking Miranda didn't want to be the center of attention, but she did. She enjoyed being in the media spotlight, so one day, from within the Northumberland County Prison in Pennsylvania, Miranda made a phone call to a journalist.
One day I got a phone call from somebody inside the jail who said, "You are now scheduled for an hour visit."
Are you saying that you have killed before? How many times, Miranda?
I know that when I hit 22, I stopped counting.
When you hit 22, you stop counting.
The journalist was shocked to hear Miranda's confession. This was big.
I could potentially be sitting in front of the world's worst female serial killer of all time.
Of course, Miranda went on to become a major topic discussed on the news all over the U.S.
Just a few days ago, Miranda Barber confessed to being a serial killer who stopped counting her victims when she got to number 22.
Immediately, Miranda became a sensation. How could a 19-year-old girl kill over 20 people and get away with it?
Well, since I turned 12, like, my entire life flipped upside down when I turned 12.
Why? What happened at 12?
I got into a gang, started doing drugs, just skipped school all the time, and the gang that I was in, it was based around Satanism.
Miranda went on to say that she had been killing people since she was 12, under the influence of Forrest and his gang.
How have you done it? All with stabbing?
No, all different kinds.
Like?
The very first time I was 13, and the leader of the gang, he had me lure this guy, and I'll never forget it. No matter how high I was, I'll never forget it.
Miranda described in great detail how she and Forrest lured a man into an alleyway, then Forrest shot him and made Miranda shoot the deadly final bullet. Then she went on to say that their bodies are all over the US, in Alaska, California, Texas, and Florida, but she only lived in Alaska and Pennsylvania. Another pretty crazy part of Miranda's story is that she believes she only killed bad people. Apparently, in Troy's case, she decided to kill him when she joked with him that she was actually 16, not 18, and he said he was fine with that. In her opinion, this made him a bad person and he deserved to die. However, as Elliot said, Miranda and her husband had been planning to kill someone for quite some time when they lured Troy into their car. Things weren't really adding up. Detectives even decided to question Elliot about it.
Do you believe this?
Do I believe her?
You, Elliot, to...
I believe her.
Us and alone.
Yes.
You believe.
100%. I fully believe she killed these people. No part of me doubts that. I always told everybody I thought Miranda was possessed.
According to Elliot, whenever Miranda was possessed by a demon, she would become Super Miranda, and that's when the murders would occur. This sounded bogus, a story meant for Miranda to attract more attention, but the police couldn't risk laughing it off. The FBI got involved and started looking for evidence of Miranda's supposed 20-plus killings, but they found nothing. Even Miranda's dad came out and told the press that his daughter wasn't a serial killer, just a serial liar. So why the lies? This is when psychologists started looking into Miranda's past.
The fact that Miranda did have a history here and this crime was so incredibly violent, I felt that there must be more to her and more to her past than had been reported on.
Soon enough, they found the gruesome acts of violence and abuse that she had been subjected to by her Uncle Richard. It seems like Miranda's coping mechanism for her trauma was to create an alter ego.
And that's one of the things that the mind can do. It's that ability to disassociate or to become somebody else. And so they put on this other persona, this other personality, to the point where 90% of their life is this fantasy, is this elaborated life, and 10% of it is the truth of what's really there.
Miranda and Elliot pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As there is no evidence of other crimes, Miranda wasn't convicted of any other murders. Ashley and Elizabeth appeared on Dr. Phil in 2014 and spoke out for Miranda not to be seen as a monster.
How do you process that?
It's hard to process.
How is she not a cold-hearted monster?
I think she was influenced by her husband.
Tragically, 2 years after the interview, Elizabeth took her own life. Miranda's actions took a terrible toll on her mental health and on so many other people. Meanwhile, she continued to seek the media's attention. In 2016, she told the press that the real motive behind the murder was that so she could get arrested and her daughter would be taken into care by social services, who are more competent at raising children than her. But she could have done that without murdering somebody, right? Then in 2018, she spoke to the press again and revealed that her serial killer story was indeed fake. Miranda Barber's case is a truly sad story about a victim turned murderer. Many people go through traumatic experiences as children, and they choose to seek professional help and support from their inner circle. Sadly, in Miranda's case, the red flags were spotted too late, and instead of seeking help, she did the very worst.
Rachel! Found her. Okay, where on the body is the patient dead? In the chest. She's trying to breathe.
The next piece of information that you need to know is that she is dead.
Her parents lost their only daughter.
I wish we could go back.
Hey there, welcome back. Have you ever been in a love triangle? It's difficult, to say the least. Inevitably, feelings get complicated and at least one person is left hurt, if not everyone involved. It all gets even more ridiculous when it happens with teenagers. They're just not as prepared to deal with serious situations, and emotional maturity is not really a thing when you're fresh off the high school benches. This was exactly the case of Rachel Wade, Sarah Ludman, and Joshua Camacho. Josh had broken up with Rachel and had hooked up with Sarah, but Rachel wouldn't take no for an answer. And Sarah hated this. She taunted and harassed her, hoping she would stop her invasive behavior. But this only made things worse, and before long, the girls were at all-out war. But one day, one of them would lose their life, and the other would spend the rest of her life in prison for it. Trigger warning, we're about to discuss themes of violence and death. If that's not something you can handle, this is your chance to turn back and check out the other videos. But if you're ready, let's dive in. Today's story begins in Pinellas Park, Florida in 2009. This was the home of 19-year-old Rachel Wade.
Rachel was actually a fun-loving child, very happy-go-lucky.
I was very active in school, did whatever I could, whatever clubs I could join.
But when she was 15, Rachel started hanging out with the wrong crew. She dropped out of school and would be gone from home late into the night without letting her parents know where she was. There was something else.
Boys became her biggest interest, and she was chasing different boys. I don't think they were always the best boys to be with. We went through some tough times with her.
When she was 18, Rachel got a job as a waitress and moved out of her family home. She was independent, courageous, and confident she would find her way in life. In 2009, Pinellas Park was also the home of 18-year-old Sarah Ludman.
Rachel Wade was sort of an all-American girl.
Sarah was a good kid. She had the whole world ahead of her.
They were both good girls with good grades, decent jobs, and loving families. No one suspected what they were going through at the time, the drama they had created for themselves. Rachel and Sarah were both infatuated with the same boy, Joshua Camacho. Needless to say, this caused some serious conflicts between the two.
I wish we could go back and instead of going against each other, maybe sitting down and talking through and just understanding that we didn't need him.
Of course, no one needs a partner who gives you mixed signals and is seeing other people at the same time. Rachel had met Josh in the summer of 2008. He was the same age as her, but he behaved pretty differently.
He was a player. He definitely had this bad boy image. He was all tatted up. He had pictures of himself, with guns and pit bulls and smoking and just had this whole rap star persona.
But as you've probably guessed, when there's a persona, there are also hidden realities. The real person behind the mask.
He was portraying himself to be. I just saw a whole nother side of him when we were alone. It was really good at first. About a month or two after we started dating, I started getting phone calls.
Rachel started getting calls from Sarah Ludman, who claimed to be Josh's girlfriend. What? Rachel was shocked. Who was first, at least? It turns out, neither. Josh started dating both girls in the summer of 2008. Instead of telling him off for being a classic douchebag, the girls started fighting with each other. For Sarah, Josh was her first love and her first boyfriend. For Josh, as he ended up saying in court, both girls were friends with benefits. The problem was that neither of the girls knew just how little Josh cared for them. They couldn't stand the idea that the other girl would steal her boyfriend. So before long, their contempt escalated to harassment.
She decided that she was gonna come to my job, made me spill some drinks. They followed me and my roommate home and tried to run us off the road, and it kind of just kept getting worse after that night.
That's when Rachel decided to stand up for herself, but not in the right way. She started leaving Sarah angry messages and voicemails, threatening her in all these terrible ways.
Seriously, I told you to watch back and not kill with him. Now your ass is mine, and I'm guaranteeing you I'm no murder you. I'm letting you know that now, because you know what? Josh might have played me, but I'm gonna play your ass out too. Watch.
Sheesh. This is just one of the voice messages Rachel left Sarah in 2008. Needless to say, Sarah was scared at this point. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Josh didn't intervene or break up with the girls. If anything, he just seemed entertained by the scandal.
It just got really acrimonious. Sarah was so upset by those messages.
That's, what both of the girls had in their heads. Well, Josh wasn't the problem, it was the other girl.
Rachel and Sarah had been at war for months, but on April 14th, 2009, things were about to take a turn for the worse. Much worse. Sarah had been crying at school the whole day. The situation was getting worse and worse with Josh, and he didn't seem to understand just how bad her conflict with Rachel was. Still, he was unwilling to break up with either one of them. All of her friends had told her to dump Josh. He simply wasn't worth her time, energy, and stress. He did not appreciate the turmoil she was feeling. But Sarah wasn't ready for the breakup yet. That evening, though, Sarah visited Rachel at her apartment.
I heard her outside beeping her horn to let me know that she was out there. I was home alone, so I wanted to leave.
On her way out, Rachel made a quick decision. She would grab a kitchen knife just in case things escalated beyond control. Sarah shouted at her to stay away from Josh and then drove past her house and left angry and frustrated. Rachel then went over to a friend's house while Sarah and Josh met up at his sister's place to watch a movie. But this wasn't enough for Josh.
But he kept texting with Rachel.
That's right, he couldn't stop being a player. even when he was on a date. But by now, these texts between Josh and Rachel weren't friendly. Rachel was urging him to stop seeing Sarah, and he was just telling her off for it. At around midnight on April 15th, Sarah realized she was way past her curfew and her parents must be worried. She'd come to Josh's sister's place with her van, so as she was getting ready to drive off, Josh's sister and her friend tagged along. They wanted Sarah to drop them off at a restaurant. So the three girls hopped into the van and Sarah drove away. Just as they were making their way down the street, another car parked facing the opposite direction flagged them down. Sarah could see the driver very clearly.
She said, "Oh my gosh, Rachel is right up the street."
Rachel leaned down on her car's hood and lit up a cigarette. She was waiting to see Josh, but as Sarah drove past, it became clear something was going to go down. Sarah wasn't going to just drive past Rachel. She stopped the van.
She pulled up about 5 feet in front of my car.
What they didn't know is that Rachel had a knife.
After months of threatening texts, voicemails, and harassment at work, both girls wanted to confront each other as physically as possible. Of course, this wasn't exactly wise. As Sarah got out of her van and started walking towards Rachel, Rachel pulled out her kitchen knife.
I grabbed the knife, thinking it might scare her off, and she approached me anyways.
The girls fought for under 5 seconds. Hair was pulled, words were shouted, and before long, Sarah got back into her van. But something was off.
It was pulling hair, next thing you know, it stops.
She hit me 3 or 4 times. I started swinging back. And the next thing I remember, she let go of me and turned around and walked back to her van.
When she looked, she realized in horror that she'd been hit in the chest 3 times. It happened so fast that not even Rachel realized what she'd done.
I just saw blood on the knife. I didn't physically remember having her. I didn't see where she was.
Meanwhile, Sarah's 2 friends were in the van screaming and scared that Sarah would lose her life. The first thing Sarah did was call Josh. She told him it hurts, and then she passed out. She didn't have the strength to call an ambulance in time. Sarah fell out of the van and into the road. As she was lying in a pool of struggling to breathe, one of her friends called 911.
Rachel! Down her.
Okay, where on the body is the patient dead?
In the chest. She's trying to breathe.
Meanwhile, Rachel threw the knife on the roof of a house and went to sit down on the porch of another house. She knew what was coming. It's not like she could get out of this. Sarah was taken to the hospital within minutes, but her injuries didn't look good.
She had a small injury here, a stab wound here. She was stabbed right in the heart. It pierced her heart.
Rachel had delivered a fatal injury to Sarah, but she had no idea. In her mind, she simply fought off another girl and sent a clear message to back off. As Josh arrived at the scene at his sister's request, Sarah was being taken away by the ambulance, but by sunrise, she was dead. Right after the attack, Detective Mike Lynch was assigned on the case. This was before Sarah was declared dead. Already, serious evidence was piling up against Rachel.
I ended up finding Rachel sitting in what used to be a bench located in front of the residence. Her demeanor was calm.
Rachel had finished all she had to do to end her feud with Sarah. In fact, it gets pretty creepy. When Rachel stabbed Sarah, she threw the knife on a neighbor's house and just said, "I'm done." This was a cold move, but she had no idea she truly was done, and so was her frenemy. Now she was just waiting for the police to come for her.
I was scared, but at the same time, I didn't really know what to think or how to react.
It was a sort of paralysis after doing something so terrible for the first time. Rachel had grown up in a stable, loving family with no history of violence or aggression of any kind. Now, her life would change forever. When Detective Lynch found Rachel sitting on the porch, he invited her to the police station for questioning. She said okay, unaware of the fact that Sarah was dead.
I wasn't under arrest or anything, so again, I was thinking, maybe it's not that bad.
But as soon as Rachel was inside the interrogation room, the detectives broke the news to her. It was bad.
When I was down at the hospital, I saw where she was stabbed at. She made no indication that there had been a stabbing, that there was a knife involved.
Hoping that Sarah would be fine, Rachel was trying to hide as much information as she could so as not to look guilty. But didn't the police officer just tell her she'd gone to the hospital? They just had to paint the whole picture for Rachel to grasp the full gruesome reality of what she'd done.
The next piece of information that you need to know is that she is dead. And she died as a result of these stab wounds.
Rachel finally understood that she would be going to jail for a long time. This was the end of her studies, her freedom, and her dreams.
When they told me that she had passed away at the hospital, I kind of lost it. I couldn't believe what they were telling me.
She had let her anger and frustration get the better of her, and now she would pay forever. Rachel Wade was charged with second-degree murder, and her bail was set at $500,000. Her family could hardly believe that this was their daughter, a person they had loved and supported in the best way that they could for 19 years. Now she had gone off and done the worst thing in the world.
Fact is, she her and she killed her. For second-degree murder, I didn't have to prove she intended to murder her.
Rachel's trial began in July 2010. In court, everyone agreed that Rachel didn't intend on murdering Sarah, but that she went at her with a knife, intending to do serious harm. There was also the fact that Sarah had approached Rachel looking to confront her. Her defense attorney wanted to play this card.
Sarah came looking for a fight, so it was apparent to me that this was a good self-defense case.
Finally, the true tragedy of this story would be revealed when Josh Camacho would be called to the stand. He dressed well and didn't act like a tough bad boy anymore, but what he said shook the girls' families. According to him, Sarah and Rachel were just friends with benefits. The boy that two girls killed each other for shrugged off their love and obsession for him. It was just the case of a couple of girls he'd slept with, he said.
When he came into court, the appearance was just a little guy, very quiet, very soft-spoken. He says, I wasn't dating either girl. They're not my girlfriend.
It was pretty shocking to everyone who attended the trial, let alone the girls' families.
After these girls and their friends and their families talked about how he was their whole world and said, I was just sleeping with them.
Imagine hearing these words and knowing you'll go to prison for the rest of your life for this douchebag. The prosecution's final argument was the most obvious one. The horrible voicemails Rachel had left Sarah over the course of the last months before the murder.
I'm gonna find you and I'm gonna beat your ass. He can get anything he wants from me. You still got your mommy and daddy's curfew. Why do you run your mouth and why are you that pathetic? So keep talking, Sarah. I'm gonna teach you it. I'm telling you now.
There was also that voicemail where Rachel promised she would kill Sarah.
Seriously, I told you to watch back and not kill with him. Now your ass is mine and I'm guaranteeing you I'm gonna murder you.
It's not like Rachel could concoct any defense against this. Now the murder looked premeditated.
I couldn't believe that it was me. It was out of character for me to say anything like I said to her.
Please tell me, Sarah, why you would be a dumb enough put a brand new picture of you and Josh at the beach on your MySpace. I'm no murder you. I'm gonna play your ass out too. Watch. You're a fat and I'm gonna kill you.
How can you think of taking someone's life over posting a picture with your crush online? Even if you're dating, can't you just leave? Rachel had one last trick up her sleeve in court. She took the witness stand. There, she said Sarah made several threats to her via calls and voicemails too. Unfortunately, she claimed she had deleted them.
It's a shame that Rachel didn't save voicemails from Sarah with threats, but she did.
Indeed, her claim didn't amount to much, as she couldn't produce any evidence. And even if Sarah came at her to beat her up that night, it was Rachel carrying a knife, and it was Rachel who plunged it into Sarah's heart. In 3 hours, the jury had a verdict.
We, the jury, find as follows: ask that the defendant in this case. The defendant is guilty of murder in the second degree as charged. So say we all. Michael Schwartz, foreperson of jury, July 23, 2010.
2 months later, Rachel appeared in court again to receive her final sentence. It was a pretty strange situation. She could either walk free after serving time as a youthful offender or get the maximum sentence. Pretty much black or white. But when Sarah's mom, Gay Ludman, appeared in court, it was clear it wasn't looking good for Rachel.
This is my daughter. She lays in a cemetery. I go visit her there.
Her message was clear. Even though Rachel was in prison, she was alive. Sarah didn't have this privilege, thanks to Rachel. Rachel Wade was sentenced to 27 years behind bars. But to Rachel's parents, this isn't justice, nor does it bring them any happiness. They agree with Sarah's mom. It's terrible that one girl had to lose her life.
We've lost our daughter as far as having her home with us, but she's still here for us, fortunately, to visit and look forward to someday her coming home. But Sarah's lost, you know. Her parents lost their only daughter.
And to think who Sarah lost her life for.
Both parents, I mean, they felt like they did everything they could to be good parents. They'd raised girls that they were proud of.
And then a bad boy came along, treated them with no respect, and turned their worlds upside down. It's a truly tragic story for two girls who had their whole lives ahead of them.
Not sitting down to talk to Sarah would be my biggest regret. We should have met up and we should have talked. And maybe it should have been him that we confronted. Instead of going after him, maybe walking away from him. No matter what somebody says about you or to you, it's not going to resolve anything to go out and fight him. And really, you could end up here.
She couldn't have said it better. If there's a lesson to be learned from this horrific case, it's don't lose your life, your freedom, or your happiness over a person who doesn't care for you. Violent conflicts are immature. Walk away from them, and you'll be much better off. Hey, thanks for watching. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more blood-chilling cases. Till next time, and stay safe.